So David, you want to go ahead and hit record?
Yeah, I'm having the live stream go off.
Okay.
Okay. It should be live streaming now.
Yeah, as soon as we hit the top of the hour,
I'm going to start
hopefully
recording.
the fire engines will have passed already.
No, it's the perfect time to start.
And two, I'll just start.
I'm using this good waiting time to catch up on all my Discord threads here.
Well, I'm hoping that the fire trucks will have gone by.
And it's not your house that's on
Yeah,
fire.
No,
So
but we're on the road that goes north from the fire station.
Gotcha.
Yes, but we did have some excitement here earlier this week when there was a natural gas or a propane explosion. Basically took out a strip mall. When you're hearing all the sirens,
it's very light though. I think when you're talking, it shouldn't be a problem. And then,
I'll mute myself.
yeah, you can exactly.
So I got 2 minutes to go on my clock. Is that about right?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I have 1 minute. So
Looks good. They must have emptied out the entire firehouse.
Yeah, I think so. And there's a light close to me too. So, you hear the horn as they go through the light also to warn folks. I'm about ready. We'll go ahead and get ready to get started here.
Yeah.
Well, hello and welcome. Thank you for attending the Tau Beta Pi Unvention. In this session, the Judy and John Pasadine Professional Development Session on preparing and deciding when to go to grad school. My name is Stephen Harper, and I'm from James Madison University, and I'm also a Tau Beta Pi District 4 Director. I'll be responsible for hosting this section. Once Dr. Bruce Lindvall has concluded, who's the speaker for this session, there'll be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. The way that worked best earlier today was actually to have you unmute yourself and ask the question directly to Dr. Lindvall. As an alternative, you can actually use the Q&A features of Zoom or Whova to send us questions during the session. For the written questions, please structure your question in the format with the name Lindvall first, then colons, and then your question. In order to stay on time, I may need to end this session at the designated time. We apologize, we may not get to all the questions. However, you can always contact the speaker through the networking features of Whova or Discord and ask your questions there. And as a spoiler, Dr. Lindvall will be giving you a direct way to contact him. This will work too. So I'll do a brief introduction for Dr. Lindvall, and then we'll let him go with his presentation. Dr. Bruce Lindvall has extensive experience in higher education. He received his BS in mathematics, an MS in guidance and counseling, and a PhD in educational administration, all from Purdue University. He was the director of admissions at the University of Kansas, associate dean at the University of Kansas Edwards campus, and chief educational manager at the College Board. He is currently an assistant dean for graduate studies at the McCormick School of Engineering and Applied Sciences at Northwestern University. Dr. Lindvall.
Steve, thanks very much for the introduction, and good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining the session. I have about 8 PowerPoint slides, and I will go through those, and I should be done in 20 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to your questions. I don't mind at all for you to open your mic up, unmute yourself, and ask your question so we can all hear that. As I think about the presentation I've done over the years, especially where we are today with all the uncertainty in the world, I don't think it's so much of should I go to graduate school. I personally think it's an important thing to do in your lifetime, and we'll talk about some of the ways that you can do that. Some of you are seniors and you're probably going to be applying this year. Others may be younger, so it's never too early to consider all of these questions. So these are just some questions that for me come to mind. Do I need a graduate degree? When you graduate, and especially right now with companies not knowing where they're going to be financially, where they're going to be with the workforce, you may get job offers, you may not get the job offers you want. So obviously one of the choices you have is to continue in school. Other students have always thought, I think I'll work for a while, I'll go back to school after I've gotten some work experience. Another question is whether you want to do a master's or PhD. One of my interesting questions I ask our undergrads at Northwestern, have you ever thought about a PhD? And most people come right back and say, I don't want to go into academia. And I would tell you that probably 70 to 80% of our PhD graduates do not go into academia. They work at a national lab, they work for a company, or we have students and faculty who will spin out a startup company and they'll work in that type of setting. Another question sometimes is, if I'm not sure about a PhD, maybe I should do a master's and then decide. I will come back to that question. Many times families sacrifice a lot to help you get an undergraduate degree. And if you announce to them you want to go to graduate school, obviously the first question many families will ask is, how are you going to pay for this? So that's a natural question that comes up. How early do you begin to plan? Well, I was involved with some colleagues in the Big Ten a while back, and we're going to have a second session, and the second session is going to be geared on sophomores and juniors. Because if you're younger, one of the things that you can be looking at is doing summer research, either at an NSF REU in the Midwest where I'm located. The Big Ten has the summer research opportunity program, but many times, as opposed to doing an internship, students will do summer research in those programs. Those programs are probably 8 to 10 weeks. They're going to pay you between $4,000 and $6,000, and typically they provide room and board. So it's not like you're going someplace to get the experience and have to sacrifice things financially. We're going to talk about what you should know about graduate admissions. If you're a senior, we're going to talk about how you're going to apply. And I think right now with COVID-19 and all the uncertainty we have in the world, what you want to do is keep your options open. When I talk to our seniors at Northwestern, we have a BSMS program. And the beauty of that is they're in a master's program. They can apply for jobs as a senior. They can see what happens job-wise and either stay in school or they can take a job. And then we give our students a window of opportunity to come back and finish the master's degree. Lots of things have changed. We all can look at the evening news and see that 30-some states have had a spike in COVID-19 cases. So we don't have this under control, and we can't begin to predict, if you're a senior, what you're going to have when you reach May and June this year. Why a graduate degree? If you're an extremely bright person, very talented, for me, a graduate degree can be very important if you want to do challenging things. Obviously, if you have an advanced degree, you're going to get paid more, and you're probably going to start in the workforce at a higher level and probably move more quickly to the upper ranks. Sometimes students make a short-term decision without thinking about the long term. We have some incredibly bright students in our engineering school, and what concerns me is the majority of students in the United States getting a degree in engineering will go into the workforce and they'll look at the salary. Mom and dad are pleased. You're going to be doing well. But the question I have is, if you go into an entry level position, you're going to be paid well, but how long are you going to enjoy doing that work without getting a graduate degree? I hope that some of what I'm going to share with you here is new to you, surprises you some, and it helps motivate me in my work today. Generally, if you're admitted to a PhD program, it is not going to cost you anything. If you're offered PhD admission, it's not fully funded, you ought to step back from that. Because typically a PhD admission letter is going to tell you that we're paying your tuition. Tuition at Northwestern is over $19,000 a quarter. You pay zero. If you go to a public university, it's less. You should be paying zero there. We all provide a monthly stipend. Monthly stipends are typically in the range of $30,000, perhaps a little bit higher. The third factor is most of us are going to pay your health insurance. Health insurance for a college student today is in the neighborhood of $4,000. So if you're admitted as a PhD student and the letter says we're paying your tuition, here's your stipend, then you owe it to yourself to say, what about the health insurance? I got another offer over here. They're paying my health insurance. Are you paying health insurance or not? Over 60% of the PhD students in engineering in the United States are not from the United States. Now, as we're going through things right now, that can be a serious problem for companies wanting to do hiring because they have to sponsor a student with an H-1B visa. If they're more and more reluctant to do that, then that means that there are going to be positions and not enough US graduates filling those positions. Master's degree enrollments across the country range probably over 80% international students. So whenever we get application pools across our entire school, 70% of our applicants are going to be international. I project that's going to drop some this year, but it's still by far the majority of the pool. The master's pools are way up in the 80% range. Most of the students that go in to master's programs because they're not funded are going to be international students. As I look at COVID-19, as I look at all the students that could not get a visa to come to the United States this year, there are just a lot of issues there where I believe that the application pools are going to drop, and they're going to drop primarily on the international side. My motivation always is to encourage more and more US students to go to graduate school and change the mix of international and domestic students that we have. We all have international students. I'm not against that. We just need to have more US students educated so companies can hire someone without having to go through the extra steps with an H-1B visa. I want to talk a little bit about graduate admissions. I'm going to throw in a big wild card this year. And if you're a junior, you're going to have to keep on top of this. Our applications are online. So that means you can go in, type in your name, your mailing address, your birth date, the simple things. And then you can save that. You can go back and do a little bit more. Unfortunately, 50% of our applications are received the week of the deadline. And when students are busy in the fall of the senior year, and then they get rushed to get that application in, you can make mistakes. So I always encourage students to start the application, to keep working on it, and don't rush it through at the 11th hour. GRE scores are the wild card this year. Not because GRE scores are not important, but there are students all over the world that have not been able to take the GRE. So many schools are saying we're not going to require the GRE in 2021 admissions. You can't look at a website for a university and know the answer, because most of the time the GRE question goes all the way down to the department. So in our engineering school at Northwestern, each department has made a decision. So I have two departments, applied math and electrical and computer engineering, that are going to require the GRE. Everybody else has said, we're not requiring it. We're telling those departments, you're not going to use it either. Now, some schools will say it's optional, and that makes it very difficult because you don't know whether submitting the scores will help you or hurt you. If your scores are not strong, then I would discourage you from submitting them. If you think you're a little bit borderline and the scores are optional and yours are very good, it probably makes sense to submit your GRE scores. Likely someplace where you want to apply is going to require the scores. I've had a few students write and say, I'm only going to apply to schools that are not requiring it because I don't want to try to find a location to take it, spend the money, etc. But you have to check in the department where you're applying and not worry about, as a whole university making a decision. Most of us have not handled the GRE that way. It's done by an individual department. You're going to be asked to write an essay, and to me, they come in three flavors. Some of us want a personal statement, and that usually means more your history of what you've done to get where you are. Sometimes a school will have specific essay questions. Tell us about your research experience. Now tell us about your career goals. Tell us about what you want to do as a PhD student when you research as part of your PhD study. We require a statement of purpose. And I had a question when I did this session earlier today. What's the most important thing? Well, most of our pools have really good students. The statement of purpose at Northwestern gives you an opportunity to name faculty, to name the research, and give us a reason to really take a hard look at you, because we think you'd be a great fit in what we're already doing. So when students ask me what can kind of push me over the top, for me, it's the statement of purpose where you're naming people. With our online applications, we have faculty that go to the whole pool. Let's say there are 350 applications. They can search on their name. They can see where they're listed in the application and where they're listed in the statement of purpose. So if I see my name 28 times, I'm going to review 28 applications and not 350. So by having an online application, that allows faculty to really pin things down. And that's why it's important to go through a department website, to read about the faculty and their research, and name people that you think would be a good match for what you're trying to do. Most of us allow an unofficial transcript. And then when you graduate, wherever you're going to go to school, you're going to send the official transcript from the registrar that shows that your degree has been awarded. So don't go out and spend $10 on a whole bunch of transcripts and mail them in. Chances are you're not going to have to do that. We're going to evaluate your research experience, especially if you are applying for PhD admission. You can be a great student. You can have great test scores if they're required, but we want to get a feel that a student that we're making a huge investment in has research experience, and people can say they were an undergraduate researcher in my lab. They did an REU on our campus, and we can tell you they do an outstanding job as a student researcher. Only our biomedical engineering department requires an interview. They're going to be challenged this year because in prior years, they brought students to campus. So they're probably going to have to do Zoom interviews, whether it's a group interview, individual interview. But for the most part, decisions are made on your application, and an interview is rather rare. I had a student the other day say, I have someone who wants to talk to me. Do you think that's a good thing? And I said, absolutely. Because if they're not interested in you, you're just going to get a rejection letter. But if they want to Skype, Zoom, talk to you on the phone, they may probe enough to figure out whether you're really the match they're looking for. I would tell you, if you're graduating in December, it's important to find out whether someone is taking new students before the fall. We don't. We bring in all of our new PhD students in the fall. So most PhD admission is actually centered on fall admissions. Some of you may feel like you need assistance with application fees. Most application fees start out around $50 and some go up to over $100. Most universities have a fee waiver process, but it's well defined and you would have to qualify. But if you feel like paying a number of application fees is a burden on you and your family, then you need to ask, can I get an application fee waiver? I'm going to tell you about this. We don't have time to get into it, but I do a presentation on this website. This is the American Society for Engineering Education. You can go to every engineering school graduate program, master's, PhD, and you can look up the total number of students. You can look up how many men, how many women, how many underrepresented minority students, how many international students. You can't find that on a university website, but every graduate program at an ABET accredited engineering school is in this website, and I strongly encourage you to look at that. If I were a female student, I would want to know the percent of female students in every mechanical engineering program I'm considering. And if the average is probably about 18 to 20%, if you find a school that's 5%, I would look at that and say, that doesn't look good. That concerns me. We all talk about diversity and inclusion. That's a major topic, as you know. Some schools have diverse student populations. Others do not. They talk about it, but you can see. I did a presentation at Argonne National Labs one time. I had an underrepresented minority student in the front row. And I asked someone to name a school, name a program. I'm not going to name the school, but they had 130 PhD students in chemical engineering. That young man in the front row almost fell off of his chair. There was one person out of 130 like him. So if he's looking at that school and says, if I showed up, I would have one other student like me, that is not a diverse student population. You can go to US News and World Report rankings. If you're a strong student, I would say start out with the top 25 or 30. You can go to faculty members in your department and say, I'm thinking about doing chemical engineering at the graduate level. Can you name some really, really strong schools? But you can also look at US News and World Report. If you're admitted to number 4 and number 5, I would not pick number 4 simply because it's ranked one place better. But it gives you an idea of the top programs. And if you think you're a top student, you ought to be looking at that group. You can use this data at the very beginning and eliminate schools where you don't want to apply, or when you get down to the end, and I'm going to mention this date. If you apply for PhD admission, nearly all of us belong to the Council of Graduate Schools. And we have an agreement that April 15th is your deadline. When you're a high school student, there's a common deadline of May 1st. For PhD admission, it's April 15th. And one thing that always perturbs me is when a student writes and says, I'm under tremendous pressure. I've gotten admission from this school and that they want my decision by March 1st. And I say they can't do that. And I'll send them that agreement, and then they can show the school and say, you're part of this organization. You cannot force me to make a decision before April 15th. If you haven't picked up on this, I'm going to show you this slide. I speak at a number of national conferences. I work nationally. I help at NSF with our EU selection. I belong to an organization called GEM. If you're an underrepresented minority student, you need to know about GEM. If you don't know about GEM, then you need to write to me and say, I have never heard of GEM, G-E-M. I need to know about it because I want to apply to that fellowship. If you're doing a master's, the GEM fellowship will basically pay for a master's degree. And if you don't know about it, I need to help you know about it. And that deadline this year is coming up on the 13th of November. Now I'm going to make an offer to you, and I do this all the time. And I know that I have some of you who are saying, oh, he's just saying that. I'm not just saying that. I feel strongly about helping students go to graduate school. This is not about Northwestern University. So students will send me, in fact, after the presentation today, I had a female student send me her resume, her statement of purpose, and said, in your presentation, you said you would look at this. I'm happy to do so because I want to help students submit the best application you can submit. I read her materials today. I was tired, so I'm waiting until tomorrow to be fresh because she's got some major reconstruction to do. She wrote too much about her past. She didn't identify where she wants to be, who she might want to work with. And when you submit something like that, you've hurt your chances of someone reading your application and making a decision. So I'm going to stop with that. There are just over 50 of you in the meeting here, and we can either look at questions that have been raised, or you can unmute a mic and clearly state your question, and I'll take questions. We've got 30 minutes, and I'll be happy to respond to questions. If we run out of time, then you can always email me That email address is on this last slide for a reason. That's my contact. This is my 4th day to spend in the office in the last 7 months. So you can call and leave a message that I'll read later, but the quickest way to get a hold of me as I work remotely is via email. So I'm ready for the first question.
Well, let's thank our speaker. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed the presentation. I have a couple questions that have shown up on Whova.
Okay.
And actually, there's a third one now. So the first question, you might have already answered it, but we'll go ahead and ask it again. How far in advance should we start preparing to apply for graduate school?
Well, if you're going to do a PhD, research is important. And you can start getting research while you're a freshman. Until a few years ago at Northwestern, students didn't know they needed to do that. So we have funding in the provost's office and the engineering school where a student applies, they have the money, they go to a faculty member who says, I can't pay you anything. And the student says, don't worry about it. I've got the money. I give that to you and you pay me. And then you've got summer research programs. The ideal time is probably between the sophomore and junior year, although there are students who are rising seniors who will do that. You always want to have a strong academic record. And if you're applying for graduate admissions, many times we want to see a faculty member. And I had an email today. And the student says, I really don't know faculty members very well. So they're going to have problems getting strong letters of recommendation that somebody wants to see. So you can start doing all those things as early as you want. It's like being a high school student, knowing you're going to do a college prep program. You don't wait till you're a senior in high school to tell mom and dad, I'm going to go to college. But you ought to be doing these things along the way so you don't have to scramble as a senior to make up for lost time. Next question.
The second one is, do you know of any schools that admit low vision students?
Low vision? Well, most of us are going to have an office that will help students who have special needs. So as you're considering schools, you probably need to look at, are there ways that a particular environment could help me? Every once in a while, I'll get a prospective student, and we have NU Accessible, and they do a lot of things to help students with accommodations. So off the top of my head, no, I can't name someone, but most of us are going to do as much as we can to help students with special needs, but it's typically an office for the whole campus, and you could ask them, can you help me? This is my circumstance.
Okay, got a final question on the written part, and then we'll go to live questions. How will graduate schools view pass-fail grades?
I didn't get that question earlier today, but guess what? We all have been through that. Almost every school in the country, when things change so abruptly, typically they went to pass-fail last spring. So you don't have to explain to anybody, you're just not going to believe this. But when COVID-19 hit, we decided we were going to get pass-fail grades. It happened almost every place. Now, the other thing that runs parallel with that, for the students who hadn't done research and they had something set up, let's say in the spring of their junior year, COVID-19 knocked them off campus, out of the lab, then that person especially is going to have a disadvantage if they were not able to get the research experience in because of COVID-19. So we're aware of that. And when we look at a transcript, we're going to say, we're not going to say what's going on here. They're just a bunch of pass grades. We're going to see that. And that's going to be challenging because one of the deficiencies we have in graduate admissions is nobody asks for your fall grades of your senior year. And that's sad because if you're really taking important courses and you've done well, then you ought to tap someone on the shoulder and say, can I send you my fall grades so you can evaluate that as part of my application? You typically are going to apply before we ever see your fall grades. Any other written questions, Steve?
Yeah, there's a couple more. They keep coming in. But why don't we go to live questions right now? And when we hit a lull, I'll come back to these questions. And those folks that actually wrote them, feel free to unmute your mic and ask your question live.
Hi, I'll ask a question. My name's Alyssa, and I recently graduated from Oakland University in Rochester, Michigan, with a bachelor's in mechanical engineering and a concentration in energy. So I've had a couple of research experiences that motivate me to pursue a career in research. So I've been looking into PhD programs. And to do this, I've been talking to professors at my school, visiting faculty websites, and even having like a couple of Zoom calls with professors at different schools. But despite this, I'm having trouble like clearly defining my interests and matching them to programs. So what advice do you have for choosing your focus for graduate studies?
Do you want to do a master's or a PhD?
A PhD.
Okay. That can be a bit of an issue because when you apply, someone's going to want to see at least some focus because they're just not going to bring somebody in and take a chance that they're going to match up with something. So you ought to have, I mean, not a narrow focus, but you ought to be able to say, I'm really interested in energy sustainability, and this is kind of where I'm at, what I want to do. But to some degree, that's going to be important so you can have a chance of being picked up by somebody. But I would continue to ask questions, explore, go to somebody's website. I've had several people recently write to me about energy and sustainability. And the last young man that wrote about one of our departments. And I said at Northwestern, there's probably more going on in two departments that take you beyond the one you've asked about. So I sent links to mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, and then probably the most work is being done in material science. So sometimes you just have to do a lot of reading on websites, drill down into a faculty member's website, their research group, and maybe even read some of the journal publications they have. But to be admitted at a competitive institution, you're going to have to define what you want to do to some degree for someone to be motivated enough to say that's somebody we ought to admit, especially at the PhD level. Masters, it's not that big a deal, especially 2/3 of the master's degree students typically do a master's courses only and don't even do research.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I have another question that's kind of related to reaching out to the faculties before applying. I've been
one of my favorite questions.
I've been reading their papers, a lot of them, and then I have questions regarding of their findings and opinions and stuff, and I have emailed them but never heard back from them.
That was going to be my answer to you.
Yeah, and then I never heard back from them. I wonder it's just because I'm international and they are not sure about the visa status.
No,
Um,
has nothing to do with it.
and they just don't have the funding for this year.
Well, I'm speaking for Northwestern. On one extreme out there are some schools that say you're going to have to go out there and find a faculty member who wants you and will fund you. For me, that's the wrong way to do it. I always encourage students to put their energy into the application because most decisions are made by a committee as opposed to an individual faculty member. Faculty members get grants that are usually good for 3 years. Faculty members never know who's going to graduate. And when someone graduates, that leaves a void. So to even write to someone and say, are you going to be taking new students? Most of them don't know. And it may be embarrassing to say, I don't know whether my grant will be renewed. And if it isn't, I'm not going to have funding for a student. So I tell students at Northwestern, don't waste your time writing to faculty. They typically will never engage until after you've submitted your application because you can write a nice email, but they really want to see your whole package. And they will see that when you apply. So I've made the statement, every once in a while a student will argue and say, no, they always write to me. And then students come up afterwards and say, I don't know where she got that answer because I've written to all these people and they don't write back. Faculty are focused on teaching and research. Because of that, I spend a lot of time communicating with prospective students because I think you deserve it. But faculty view the world very differently. And when you say, I've written to people I haven't heard back, doesn't surprise me at all. It has nothing to do with whether they like females or not. It has nothing to do with your being an international student. They just don't write back.
Mm-hmm.
So I would name people in my statement of purpose that are good matches and hope that, more than one of those people will say, that's somebody we should admit because they have an unbelievable record. Because most of the time when you go in, you're going to have time to meet the faculty, to talk to the students and get paired up with who's going to become your advisor. I just attended a PhD defense this week. One of my all-time favorite students. The day that I met him at NSBE, I turned to the person in the booth with me and said, we're going to get Jan to come to Northwestern. And we did. He just finished his PhD dissertation on Monday this week. And, he was just a great applicant. And he came and thought he wanted to work with someone, but then the material science faculty all do their presentations. He did a 180-degree turn, ended up working with someone else who he didn't even know about. So, you present yourself that you're a great candidate, maybe for several faculty, and then they're going to give input to the admissions committee who's going to admit you at Northwestern. And then other things fall into place later. But if you spend time writing, you're wasting time and you're going to do nothing but get frustrated. Like, I can't believe nobody is writing back to me. They don't.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Bruce, have questions coming from everywhere. I even got one on my watch here. Is there an advantage over attending grad school right after undergrad as opposed to working first and then going back to school?
Absolutely. Why? The day you finish your bachelor's degree, unless you're burned out, you are the best prepared at that time of your life to go to graduate school. Now, if you're burned out and you need a break, one of the things you can do is get a 1-year deferral. I had another student that I recruited, and he'd worked for Booz Allen Hamilton for 3 years. And he did a panel with our undergrads. And I'd never heard Peter say this, but he said, Bruce, I made up my mind in my 3rd year of work. If I didn't go to graduate school now, I would never have done it. You know, you get used to having a salary, buying things, not studying, having a different type of lifestyle. And the longer you do that, the more difficult it is to go back to school. So unless you're burned out, I think that going directly into graduate school is probably a good thing unless you really need a break. But the longer you're out, the rustier you get, you're going to forget some things, and there's typically an adjustment coming back into school.
There's a couple questions asking about minimum GPAs required for a master's or a PhD program.
Okay. In higher education, the rule of thumb is usually a 3.0. In other words, if they see someone with a 2.8, they may take that application and push it aside. Why? Because at Northwestern, you have to have a 3.0 to get a graduate degree. So if your borderline 3.0 is an undergraduate student, it's very difficult to envision that person's going to come in and have a 3.7 in graduate school when they had a 2.8 or a 3.0 as an undergraduate student. There are some programs, and those programs at Northwestern wouldn't even tell me, except one day someone let something slip, and he said, in our department, we kind of do the first cut at a 3.4. The average GPA for new graduate students is typically in the 3.6, 3.7 range. Now, the key word in that is average. Sure, we have some 4.0 students, but we also turn down 4.0 students who have never had any research, who don't have strong letters of recommendation. But I would say it's a pretty good standard. If you're not in the ballpark of a 3.0, PhD admission is probably completely out of line. And then what you typically would have to do is go do a master's, do really well, and then move into a PhD program. Next question.
Yes, thank you. So somebody that's is working in the industry and not considering a PhD, what type of master's should they go for? Something with a thesis base or a non-thesis based master's?
Well, as I said earlier, if you caught it, about 2/3 of the students in the United States, unlike years ago, will do a master's without thesis. That's more and more common. If your work is going to be research, or if there's any chance that you want to go on and do a PhD, doing a master's with research may be important. But if you're going to do research, you lose control of something that's really important, and that's the end point. A faculty member may tell you, you may think you're done, but I want you to do more here. If you're taking courses, you know when you're going to take the last courses, and you know when you're going to graduate. But if you're doing research, and I have BSMS students, I had a young man this summer who kind of went off on the department because he did his bachelor's and he did his master's, and someone talked him into doing a master's with thesis, and he wound up being here an extra year. He was not happy. And I said, well, if you'd asked some of us, we would have told you it's going to take longer. And unless there's a reason to do a master's with thesis, I wouldn't do it. But if you're going to go back into industry and want to do some things that are research related, then a master's with thesis might be important.
To kind of pigtail off of that idea, what are your thoughts on the new professional PhD programs coming out?
Well, if I understand what you're asking, there are some programs that are a doctor of engineering as opposed to a PhD. So those programs are typically more work related rather than research related. We do not offer that at Northwestern, and certainly some schools don't. We offer only the PhD. There are other schools that will offer a Doctor of Engineering or the PhD. And, you know, depending upon what you want to do someday, if research is going to be important in the work you want to do, then doing a PhD with research is probably more important. But yeah, some of those programs have been around for a while, and I'm not aware of any great movement that way. One of the things that's been interesting is there are PhD programs in what's called engineering education. Purdue had the first program. I read the other day about the University of Florida. Virginia Tech has a program. So sometimes students want to do a PhD in an engineering school, but focused on, you know, teaching and those types of things. So that's probably a growing area. I'm not aware of any big movement where the Doctor of Engineering is popping up a lot.
Can you provide your thoughts on, with respect to the PhD? There's PhD programs where it's just like the PhD, and then there's ones where you can bump along the master's and PhD, and then there are like PhDs where you can opt to take extra coursework even if you're not getting the master's. What is the benefit, pro or con, to the different types of PhD?
Sure. I will tell you what we have, and that's probably true a lot of places. We have one department, biomedical engineering, that the way they're set up, you're going to get your master's. It's required on the way to the PhD. Most of our programs, you're admitted to a PhD, and then if you want to get your master's along the way, and some students want to do it. I'm not a big fan of, why do you need a master's degree when your ultimate goal is going to be a PhD? Now, sadly, what happens in a few cases is a student decides they really don't want the PhD, or the department has a really tough conversation and says, you're just not cutting it. How about if we give you the runner-up prize, give you a master's degree, and you be on your way? So if you apply for PhD admission, many schools were going to let you get your master's along the way. And it's also the escape hatch if the PhD just doesn't work out. Next question.
I had a question on like how different experiences on your application are weighted. So how are like research and development internships seen as opposed to REUs, as opposed to undergraduate research assistants, and so on and so forth?
Sure. Well, if you're doing PhD, people really want to see research. So if you do an internship and there's some research involved in that, then you really need to bring that out in your application. But if you're talking about PhD admission, then the majority of the time doing a research type activity, SROP, REU, is going to be more important than having an internship. I have students all the time in our engineering school weighing things out. And typically, I tell them about an REU or an SROP, and they look at me and say, I've never heard of that. I have no idea what you're talking about. And then when you explain, you're going to gain research experience, you're going to get paid, you're going to get paid very well, then students say, well, that doesn't sound like a bad deal at all. Plus, it's going to give me the research experience that can help propel me into a PhD program. But certainly people are going to do a master's degree, an internship's going to be fine. Even research experience to do a master's with thesis. Most of us don't ask you, are you going to do a master's with or without a thesis? But it's the research experience that's really critical for someone who's going to do a PhD. You have to have 4 summers worth? No. But if you don't have some significant research and somebody can write about that, that can spell trouble for you.
If your research is not in engineering, but STEM and or something else, what like key aspects of that non-engineering research
Sure.
are the most important to talk up?
Well, I think the importance is someone has seen you do research and they can react to that, whether it's engineering or whether it's research that matches what you want to do in a PhD. That's not as important as getting some solid research. So if it's something that's in a STEM field, but it's not engineering, I don't think that's going to hurt you much at all. And especially now, I mean, we've had students last summer that, you know, they wanted to do research and some of the programs went virtual. Some of the programs didn't exist. I had 55 PhD students do an internship in the summer, and I would say that the majority of them stayed right here in Evanston because they couldn't go to 3M. They couldn't go to Intel. I mean, they stayed here and did that experience virtually, probably got paid very well, but it was very different than actually going to an Intel location someplace, you know, in Arizona or Washington State or California and being on site to do that.
With respect to recommenders, for people who've been into the workforce for a year or 2 or 3, do you recommend having a coworker or someone talk as one of the 1 or 2 or 3 recommenders, or just research advisors, even if they're years ago?
Well, if you're talking about PhD admission, then someone that's in an academic setting is going to carry more weight for you than someone where you did an internship and they can talk about you in certain ways, but not really cover some of the important research experiences someone would like to hear about. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about references. Most of us want either 2 or 3. At Northwestern, we have 3 spaces. And here's what I suggest to students. Read the department website. And if the department website says a minimum of 2, and you have 2 people that you're going to put at home plate in the World Series, and they're capable of hitting the ball out of the park, and the third person strikes out 2/3 of the time, stop with 2 recommenders, because 2 really strong recommenders is more important than 2 strong ones and then a wild card you throw in there, and they take you out of the pool. So just because there's 3 spaces on an application, go to the website and see if it says minimum of 2. And then I would ask people face to face and say, Steve, could you write me a strong letter of recommendation? And if they hem-haw around, they look at the ceiling, they look at their watch, and you think, man, this guy's trying to get out of this. I shouldn't use him. I had a young man apply a few years ago, and he was an outstanding candidate. And his mother told him, I told you not to use that person. He saw the 3 blanks and he went with number 3. I read something I had never seen in my entire professional career. This young man should have been admitted to almost every place where he applied. This person wrote a letter and said this student should never be a graduate student in the United States. He wrote that letter, agreed to write the letter, and sabotaged the student. And that young man had to borrow money, do his master's with us, and today he's a PhD student at Duke University. But he made the mistake of going to number 3, and number 3, for whatever reason, decided that he wanted to write something really bad, and it cost him every admission at the PhD level that he put in.
Well, I hate to end on that note, but unfortunately we're out of time. So on behalf of Tau Beta Pi, I want to thank our speaker for answering questions and their great presentation. It's been a pleasure to have you present this year. This concludes the session. And I know we didn't get to all the questions, but hopefully we can get them posted on Whova, and there's an ability to answer the questions. Folks can go and answer them there. So please access the Whova for all the other sessions and provide your feedback on the rate feature for Whova. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, and I look forward to working with any of you that want to follow up. I'm going to be in the recruitment fair the next 2 days. If you want to come and chat, it doesn't have to be about Northwestern. If you want to talk about things in general, I'll be available. But thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye now.